Well, thank you all very much for coming. I think it's time to start. Wonderful group of people, wonderful number, which just is reflective of the importance of this subject in terms of having legacies and bequests for your organization, and also the world renown, really, of Ligia Pena, who is going to be speaking to us today. Ligia is in Canada. She's outside Montreal. She is both a fundraiser specializing in legacy fundraising, and also she is the executive director of Chapel in York's Canadian Foundation. So we are very thrilled to have her today in both those regards. Just a moment. I don't have to tell you where the exits are, which is great. But I will tell you that we will share the video of this when we're done, and Ligia's deck will also be available to you. If you have any questions, chuck them into chat, or I suppose even put your hand up or your virtual hand up. Ligia has said that she'd like to answer them as she goes along, because it obviously helps in the flow of things. Very interactive today. And with really no further ado, I would like to turn the screen over to Ligia for what's going to be an absolutely amazing hour of international legacy fundraising. Ligia Pena.
Thanks so much, Nancy, and hi everybody. I'm very happy to have you here. Excuse me. Legacies for me is an addiction. I'll be really honest. I love it. It's fun. It's interesting, and it is the epitome of philanthropy in my book. And so I'm very happy to be here and wear double hats today and talk about what I'm most passionate about, while also helping charities around the world explore how to engage with supporters in other countries, because it is doable. So let me just get my PowerPoint up and running and present mode. And here we go. So that's me. Are we good? So when I give presentations, I love them when I find them more interesting and more fun. I don't know about you, when they are interactive. So I encourage you to ask your questions as we go along, and basically, and what I'll do is I'll stop every slide or every 2 slides to check in the chat box if there are any questions, and if there aren't, well, we'll just continue. End of story. That's good. So please don't hesitate. I'm here to help you gain a better understanding of how to explore legacy giving in different countries. So before we get started, we have a little poll, and Sue over here will launch the poll, which you should be getting a question on your screen. And just to get a sense of basically how developed your legacy program is right now. And now I'm not talking internationally, I'm talking in the country you're in, where you're working right now. How developed is your program, if it is? So I'll give you a minute or so. And also, by the way, we're not tracking like the answers, so don't worry. We're not going to come back at you. Okay. Are you getting the quiz, the poll on your screen? Yes? Okay. Awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. How are we doing on completion, Sue?
We're at 90%.
Oh, wow. You guys rock. All right. Can we give you a couple more seconds to answer, and we'll close it, and let's look at the results. Let's see. Excellent. So 13% have an advanced, well-supported program. Now, I know we're being cheeky here about well-supported. Ask any fundraiser and they'll say, it's never enough. We need more support, right? Like, I'm sure that's basically most of your responses to that. You're working on it, but could do better. And that's great because it's important to recognize that there's always something we could be doing better. And then 33% of you do not currently have one. So that's really interesting. And that's a pretty big percentage of you. So just so you know, there are a few things you'll be able to get out of this session. But ultimately, this session is really geared towards organizations that already have a program and are looking at expanding into other markets. So I just want to be very clear so that expectations are managed. But I'm happy to recommend sources and information towards the end of the session if you want to look at how you could start a legacy program. Okay, so let's get started. Legacy giving abroad, considerations and opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities, but there's things that you need to consider when you're looking at expanding your program into new markets. So today we're going to be talking specifically about Canada and the US, so North America. So Nancy already introduced me, but basically this is what my hair looks like when I come out of the hair salon. So let's just be real here. My superpower is building that solid foundation that allows legacies to flourish. So I'm very much a systems and process person, because so many legacy programs often only rely on marketing, but then they don't have like the back end pieces that make that donor journey work. So I'm that person. I love programs that are data informed, because data are, the way I see it, is data is just a story waiting to be told, and we need to know what the pieces of that story is so that we can tell the right stories. And well, basically, I'm so much of a nerd that I'm even doing a PhD on the topic at the University of Kent in the UK. And I'm researching the role, how to develop trust with donors by using, or if it helps, mission impact reporting. So how you can leverage impact reporting to develop trust in donors that will lead to confirmed pledges. So stay tuned. It's going to take a few years now. All right. So when I talk about getting legacies from other countries, is this the kind of reaction that you have, that you're like, oh my God, your head's going to explode, you're hyperventilating, it's scary, what are you going to do, and you might pass out? And if the reaction is yes, then I don't blame you. It can feel very overwhelming. Even just raising legacies in your market can be quite challenging, and it's a long-term game. And then when you're looking at new markets, it's even more overwhelming. So the objective of this session is to clarify all this. So let's make it simpler, because it might feel complicated, but it's actually much more simpler than you think once you know the key pieces of information that you need to know and understand. Okay, so during the session, we're going to clarify some terminology. I'm going to do a little bit of a comparative analysis between the US and Canada. And yes, there are some differences, but we also have a lot of similarities. I'm going to share with you a few do's and don'ts when doing cross-border legacy fundraising. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistical predispositions of your donors that would have a higher tendency to consider a gift and a will. I'll share with you a sample survey and some will language that you can use in your marketing with your donors in other countries. And then I'm going to talk about other gift vehicles to consider within the legacy area. And then I'm going to share some resources on questions that you can use to have deeper legacy conversations. So a few technical stuff and a few practical stuff for you. Okay. Are we ready? Yep. Awesome. Cool. So let's clarify a bit of a terminology. And I'm sure those of you that are in Europe or in Australia, Pacific, basically not in North America, you often hear the word planned giving, right? And what does that mean really? Well, newsflash, it means absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing to our donors. So in North America, it's been a term that's been used a lot and continues to be used a lot, especially in the US. And basically, planned giving, what it actually means is that it encompasses a slew of donations that are part of a donor's financial and fiscal plan. So we're talking about bequests, so gifts and wills, gifts of life insurance, charitable remainder trusts, gifts of pension plans, etc. So it's very, very financial driven, okay? And the reason why is because some of the biggest organizations that were really, when legacy fundraising was really developed in North America, mostly in the US at that time, we're talking about Harvard University. So when you look at the profile of those kinds of donors in history, we're talking about 200-300 years ago, it was a lot of like very wealthy, people with a more complex financial structure. And so those tools were developed for that. It's changed a lot over the years. So another terminology is a term that is used a lot is gifts and wills. So it's very straightforward, right? It's the donation that's written in the last will and testament, and it's only realized upon death. Very straightforward, not difficult to understand. And then there's legacy, and which most people in Europe use this terminology. Some in Australia, but in Australia, they use more bequests and planned giving as well. This is what I've observed from the work I've done and the times I've presented in Australia. So legacy is more common, and it's actually growing in popularity in North America. And it has a bit more of a donor-centered term for gifts and wills. Here's the challenge. Legacies is also a term that donors have a difficulty understanding. And here you're going to get, the slides and the recording. So you're going to be able to click on all the sources that I'm citing in the presentation. And this is an academic paper that Dr. Russell James at Texas Tech University, that's his picture. He's really lovely and very generous with all of his research. He open sources everything, right? And what he did, he conducted a study that looked at the titles that nonprofits use for their fundraisers. And what he discovered, I'm just going to really simplify it, but what he discovered when it came to legacy-related titles, he discovered that most donors don't even understand what legacy and planned giving means, because it's an internal term, it's internal terminology. So in his recommendations, he says, use for your title, but I think the same could be said about how you reference what you're trying to do, what you're trying to fundraise for, is reference the actual gift. So if you are talking with a donor and you want them to consider a gift in a will, be specific, talk about a gift in a will. Don't say bequest. Bequest is a legal term. Any legal terms tends to scare people away because it's either complex or they don't understand what that means. So make it simple for them. If you want to have a conversation about the donor considering a gift in a will, reference specifically gift in will. If you want to talk about a life insurance gift, mention that specifically. Don't try to beat around the bush, but be very specific, because then the donor will know exactly how to respond, because they'll know what you're asking for. So this is a bit of a big mindset shift when we're talking about this area of fundraising, because if we don't, then what happens when someone doesn't understand what you're talking about? Wall goes up, they disconnect, and they say, no, thank you, right? So we need to meet donors where they are, not the other way around. Make sense? So I encourage you to read this paper. It's really quite interesting. And I know that there's been a few blogs online that have been written referencing this, so you can also search for that as well. All right, so let's do some comparative analysis. So when we're talking about donor participation, and there's quite a big difference between the two. So in Canada, approximately 7% of Canadians include a charitable gift in their will, with only 12% planning to leave a legacy gift. So what this means is that there's still a lot of Canadians that are unaware. Now, a lot of the reason why the percentage is so low, despite the fact that in Canada we have, our tax system is made so that we don't pay inheritance tax, and there's a lot of great benefits to, which I'm going to talk about later, benefits to including a gift in the will. It's just that we didn't have a really well-structured national campaign to promote will writing and including a gift in a will. We used to have one. There's been a reboot of one, but it's not at the level of, I guess, sophistication as as Remember Charity in the UK. Like that one was mirrored after the US campaign. But then they invested so much and they did so much research that it is the example right now of the type of national marketing campaign to promote gifts and wills. But we did relaunch a new program called Willpower about 3 years ago, actually 4 years ago, excuse me. And we're seeing a shift slowly. So it takes time, but it's coming together. It is happening. In the US, however, it's about 10%. 2 years ago, it was 9%, but about 10% of Americans are leaving a charitable bequest in their will. Now, that might seem like a lot, but they don't also have like a national campaign. They have Leave a Legacy, which is their campaign, but it's very much run by volunteer groups like everywhere, but it's not there's no national strategy. Some states have a great campaign, other states do not. So there's something I want to point out here that's really important, especially for those of you in the UK that are in this session. So can anyone tell me what percentage in overall giving in the UK, what percentage of overall giving comes from legacies? Does anyone know? You can pop it in the chat. Let me see. No idea. Okay. Anyone wants to venture a guess? Oh, hi, Neil. Around 20, 50, 30. Last time I checked, yes, Helen, but I'm looking at, okay, 4 out of 12 billion. 4 billion out of 12 billion. Yeah, so it's about 20%, 21%. I think when I checked back at the beginning of the pandemic, it was around 18%. So I can just assume that has increased. So when you consider, okay, so this is the key, and people freak out when I say this. When you consider how small the UK is, and let's just say, just to be, just for fun, 20% of all philanthropy in the UK comes from legacies. Small country, right? When you consider the wealth and the amount of philanthropy being done in the UK, in the US, and it's only 10%, what do you think? It is huge, right? Very big philanthropic market, but only 10% of all philanthropy in the US comes from legacies. What happens in your brain when you hear this? Like, how do you interpret that? You can unmute if you want to, or you can pop it in the chat. Yes, exactly. Huge area for growth, big potential, you know, a lot of opportunity. So you're probably wondering, because I also wondered, well, then why isn't it happening? Why isn't, like, I remember doing this, a presentation similar to that at the French fundraising conference. And in France, when I checked, this was 3 years ago, 26% of all philanthropy in France comes from legacies. And they were blown away because they thought, no, well, there's a distinction. They also offer life insurance. But what it is that the challenge in the US, and it's important for you to notice, is that they keep, and this goes back to my previous slide about the terminology. A lot of organizations, especially small and medium-sized organizations, what do they do when they start a legacy program? They look at the big institutions and they try to replicate those programs, right? So what happens? If you're looking at big institutions like Harvard, NYU, the big Silicon Valley foundations, the big healthcare organizations across the country, they all have these, high value or high net worth individuals contributing major gifts. And so most of them have quite complex financial and fiscal plans. So they offer a variety of different donation vehicles. So these smaller organizations try to emulate this. And I can tell you this because I've worked with a lot of US organizations. And so when they try to emulate those kinds of bigger programs, but their donors are not in the same level, the same capacity, then they're trying to promote all these other donation vehicles, all these planned giving vehicles, but that don't align with what their donors need. Their donors don't know. So what happens when someone doesn't understand what you're saying, when it doesn't reflect what your reality is? What do? Wall up, disengage. This is not something I want to do. So I want you to get into that mindset that even if you're a big institution in your market, you're expanding into a new market. So start small, start simple, make it easy so for your donors and your supporters to know what you're talking about, and then go from there. If you try to offer a long menu, right, of ingredients, and you're trying to build, if you want to have a margarita pizza, but you're offering a long menu with 25 ingredients to make that margarita pizza, what's going to happen? They're going to go and have a burger because they don't understand what it is that you want. So you want to think about that analogy when you're trying to develop your legacy program. So another comparative analysis. Average gift in Canada, it's a slightly lower, and so the average. Oh my gosh, I wrote the wrong information in the U.S., but I'll fix that. In Canada, the average residual gifts hovers around $45,000 residual. Right? A pecuniary gift, so a specific gift, usually ranges about $10,000 or $15,000. It's not a lot, and that's across the world. Every market, when you look at the average residual gift, it is always significantly higher than the pecuniary gift. In the US, the average residual gift, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to correct this section here, my mistake. The average US residual gift is about $55,000 to $65,000 USD. And the pecuniary is about the same as Canada, but between 10 and 15,000. So it's important to see that if you're looking at the potential of everything there, it's quite similar to other markets as well when you consider like the local currency. So the legal framework, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you at least, and I've been doing this for over 20 years, there are a lot of great benefits. So I know in other markets, there are no fiscal benefits to including a gift in a will. But in Canada, Legacy gifts made through a will or life insurance, or RRSP stands for Registered Retirement Savings Plan. So basically like a individual generated pension plan or charitable remain trust. We, as Canadians, we receive a tax credit that reduces the taxes owed on the estate. And so, first of all, the charity pays zero tax on that donation. And then the estate will pay less tax because that donation, you can apply the credit 100% of the donation amount to lower the taxes owed on the estate. So it's quite interesting. And in terms of, I didn't want to include what the credit rates are because they vary from province to province, territory to territory. And at the end of the day, as a fundraiser, it makes no difference to you because you wouldn't be advising the donor about the tax credit. That's not the way to go. In the US, however, it's yes, Nancy.
Well, sorry, you wanted me to say something about the U.S. You say your bit, and then I'll say whatever's left over.
Go for it. Go for it.
Okay. So anyway, I'm a U.S. qualified lawyer in America, and used to be an estates and trust lawyer. So as of this year, I think you can leave almost 14 million US dollars tax free. So the threshold, unlike places like the UK, which is vastly smaller, there's almost never going to be a tax on estates. But obviously, there are people that have significantly bigger estates than that, and bequests or legacies to charitable organizations reduce the amount of the estate, and they reduce the amount of the estate tax. Unlike income tax deductions, bequests to foreign charitable organizations can qualify for the estate tax deduction because they forgot the word American in the legislation. But you would have to prove that the charity is like an American charity. You may not want to go that way. You may want to say leave the money to the US entity and then to you. But anyway, so that's the US thing. Sorry, Licia.
No, don't apologize. That's what you're here for.
Not just a pretty face.
Not just a pretty face at all. So what are some of the do's and don'ts? Because that's always important, right? So you do want to adapt your campaign to the market. And I think some of the information I shared before, you can leverage that, right? So, if you talk about, your programs in your country, you want to make it culturally relevant. Now, let's be honest, English speaking countries are very similar, but there's always some distinctions in terms of the terminology used, how you would address different things. So you want to do a little bit of research, a bit of recon. And for that, that's the kind of stuff we can help you with, right? So I've often read through appeal letters or brochures for some chapel in York fund holders to just make sure that the language is adapted to the Canadian market, for instance. You want to build relational trust, and that's really important. And that's actually the topic of my PhD. So how do you build that relational trust? Conversations, impact reporting, testimonials, even having conversations with people. There's the ocean that separates us shouldn't stop you from being able to have those conversations with your donors. And so now it's more important than ever to build that trust with the state of the world as it is right now. You might want to consider partnering with legal professionals in the region where you see you've got most donors. So let's say you're looking at expanding your legacy program in the US, and you do a little bit of data mining and you see, oh, well, most of our supporters are in New York, let's say. Well, then you might want to try to identify, by connecting with professional associations or other fundraisers or trusted donors and supporters in New York, that can put you in contact with some legal professionals who could be that on the ground resources to provide that legal advice to your supporters, because you cannot do that. And even if you were physically in New York, you still wouldn't. You're the fundraiser. Your job is, your expertise as the fundraiser is two things: your organization's mission and your donors, who they are. The rest, they can be given a list of trusted professionals that they can go and seek additional support and resources so that they can make the right decision for their family. You want to use local terminology. So going back to what we were talking about before, the terminology there, legal term, and I mean, you don't want to sprinkle a bunch of legal terminology in your marketing pieces, but in some markets, you can supporters can use a lawyer. In another case, they can use a notary. So understanding those differences is important. Start with values-based asks. So what do I mean by that? Values-based asks are questions that nudge the donor to think about what are their values, their personal values that they live by, and can make that connection with what the organization does. So that what you're doing is you're engaging the donor in a deeply personal way that makes them see how they fit within what you're trying to do and what their legacy could look like because of that shared value with your organization. And then, very important, if you're going to be raising funds internationally through gifts and wills, is you want to update your gift acceptance policy. So this is incredibly important because it could have some ramifications should there be something that happens in the future. So you want to protect yourself, but also protect your donors properly so that it's in your policies and procedures. And for that, if ever you need an example of a North American-based gift acceptance policy, I'm happy to provide that, that you can then use as inspiration and then pull the pieces that you need that you can add in your own gift acceptance policy. Does everybody have a gift acceptance policy? Like, give a thumbs up in the chat box if you do. Awesome. Yes, yes, yes. Cool, cool. And if you don't, that's perfectly fine. It's, it's one of those like things that people tend to push aside or don't think about, but don't forget that a governance best practice is also to review the policies every couple of years, make sure that it reflects what the market looks like. So it's something that with your board you want to be looking at. So some things that you don't want to do when you're talking about cross-border legacy fundraising is overcomplicate your program. Again, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, don't try to offer the moon when you only have the capacity to do one thing, right? And my advice, and this is how I build my own business, is focus on the one of all the financial vehicles that fall under the plan giving umbrella. The most common gift vehicle is gifts and will. So just focus on that. Crack the nut on that one and drive it home. And then if you get asked about other gift vehicles, then go get the support to help you manage that request. But really focus on gifts and wills because that does represent between 85 to 90% of all plan giving vehicles. So you don't want to waste your time on all these other little smaller ones that are just going to, want to drop your hands by your side and give up. Oh, I see here, Kathy. Yes, but we need to review to remove fossil fuels and tobacco. Oh, been there. I've worked with youth organizations and I had to specify that. And yeah, it's quite a process. So I'm glad that to see that people are making having that reflection about gift acceptance policies and what kind of funds you'll accept and which ones you won't. So another don't is make assumptions that campaigns resonate in different markets. So a campaign may resonate in your specific market where you are currently operating, but that doesn't mean that that translates into, Canada or the US. So you might have to either adapt the campaign so that it lands properly in North America, or you might have to think of a different concept altogether. So something to be very, very careful is saying, oh, well, it worked really well here and we really like it and we don't want to spend the money into something new. So let's just copy paste, change the address, change a few names, and off we go. If you want to try that, what I would recommend instead is test it with a few trusted donors to see how it lands. If it lands, great, proceed. If it doesn't, adapt, change, find a new concept for that campaign. You don't want to lead with technical or fiscal benefits. I hate to say it, but there's still so many organizations that are doing that. And honestly, the fiscal or technical benefits of gifts and wills is not the reason why people leave a gift in their will. They're not like, oh, I'm going to leave a gift in my will because I know my taxes, my estate won't be taxed a lot. No, that's just an added bonus. But number one reason is because they share the same values. That's why it goes back to having those deep conversations that are values based. Don't assume that your supporters have a will. As I mentioned earlier, there's still a lot of people that are not writing wills. There's a lot of discomfort around will writing. So demystify that, make it interesting. And there's a lot of different ways that you can make will writing easy to do. Basically, our jobs as fundraisers is to remove all the obstacles that prevent donors from moving forward. Don't use polished stock photos. What I mean is like start using Shutterstock or whatever. Use photos of real people, of your programs, of your projects, of your supporters. Make it relatable so that people can see themselves in those images. And don't pull the trigger too quickly. And what I mean by that is asking for the gift way too soon before your supporters were able to understand how what their role plays within the legacy realm, right? So you want to build that trust, talk about how, the vision you have for the future and the impact the donor could have. And then once that, donors are really smart. They will show signs of being ready to have that conversation and to have that actual ask. You just need to be attuned to that. And that's really key. Any questions? So far, so good. Okay, here, Christine has a question. Presumably, the technical and fiscal benefits would never outweigh the amount of a legacy. There's no evidence that it would. So this is why, and I was going to address this shortly, but this is why having conversations about residual gift as opposed to pecuniary gifts is so important. Because, okay, I'll preempt that. If you're having a conversation with a donor and you ask for a specific gift, would you consider a $15,000 or $25,000 gift in your will to, support a scholarship? Let's just say, hypothetically speaking. Here's what's going to happen in a person's mind, and this is where the behavioral science piece is so interesting and so much fun, at least to me anyway, is that your donor will not be making, when they hear that ticket price, that $25,000, what they'll think about is automatically think about how, whether they have the capacity to sign over a check of $25,000 based on their reality today. They're not thinking about, well, when I pass away, my estate will be valued at X amount, and there'll be all these debts to be paid off, so there'll be my net value of my estate will be X, and so $25,000 is nothing compared to everything that the estate is worth, right? They're not making that connection. And so that's why residual gifts are so much more interesting, because they can't visualize what the ticket price will be. So when you're talking about the technical or the fiscal benefits, and when I say technical, I'm talking about the different donation vehicles and how to structure and all of that kind of stuff. And when I talk about the fiscal benefits, well, most donors will think, well, I've passed away, I do want to reduce the tax piece, but it's hard for them to gauge basically what that will look like based on a specific gift. Am I answering your question, am I getting too complex here? Does that make sense, Christine? Yes. Okay, cool. But thank you. That's a great question, though, I do have to say. But that's the bit that I think in the sector we haven't quite understood how the amount, the tax benefits, and how behavior science, all these three things interact, and where they merge, where they intersect is what I meant to say, where they intersect, and how the way we're presenting our marketing materials can oftentimes, we are our own worst enemy, because we try to anticipate what supporters need to make the decision, but in doing so, we also put barriers. So we want to be careful in that way. All right, so some statistical predispositions, and I see TikTok, the time. I mean, as you can tell, I can talk about this all day long. The statistical predispositions, they're very similar across all Western countries, okay? To varying degree, but they're pretty much the same. It's something that we see over and over and over again in all the studies. So oftentimes it's mostly female, older in age, obviously. Although this is kind of starting to change, right? And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. Higher level of education, there's been many studies that demonstrate that someone with a university degree, and the higher the level of university degree, the more propensity there is for them to include a gift in a will. Okay. Oftentimes single or widowed. I also want to say, and this is a new presentation that I developed with a colleague at UNICEF. We were looking at childless and child-free women, which is quite an interesting element in here to consider. The no children, obviously individuals with appreciated assets, and oftentimes long-time smaller gift donors. So mostly your monthly supporters. There's still that misconception that only high net worth individuals, or mostly high net worth individuals, so your major gift donors, will include a gift in a will. And all the research repeatedly demonstrate that it's the donors that make small donations, but over a long period of time, that have the higher tendency to include a gift in a will. And oftentimes, those are the ones that are leaving the big ticket donations, the big legacy gifts, okay? So when I work with a client and I have a data person that I work with, when we do the data extraction, we look at minimum 10 years of donation history, and then we look at those who have given regularly, month after month, over a long period of time, those who give monthly, but also make additional donations, like those special campaigns, etc. So we look at that kind of data, because those are going to be the segments that we're going to prioritize in the rollout of the legacy program. So those are some of the things you want to be looking at. So if you're building your fundraising program in North America, yes, of course, it makes sense that you want to go get the major gift donors. It makes absolute sense, because otherwise it's very costly to run a fundraising program in a different market. But I don't want you to do this at the detriment of building a very big base of regular monthly donor programs, because that's where you will find the majority of your legacy prospects. Any questions about this? Does this resonate? What do you think appreciated assets are these days, please? Well, let's rephrase that. When we're talking about appreciated assets, we're talking about real estate. We're talking about investment. So of course, it makes sense that because of the current economic situation, it fluctuates. But the big but in all of this is, consider that most times a legacy gift, a gift in a will come in 10, 15 years in the future. So while a lot of donors might hold back their giving, they're giving based on their disposable income today, it doesn't stop them from including and having those legacy conversations, because they know that, as with anything in the economy, things move up and down and up and down. You can't anticipate what your assets will look like in 10 or 15 years. So that should not stop you from having those legacy conversations. And I would go as far as saying, and this is actually a study I want to do, and it's been on my mind for 5 years since the pandemic hit, is I want to look at how organizations that had a legacy program at the beginning of the 2008 economic crash, the recession, how they've weathered the storm through also the pandemic because of legacy gift, right? Because that's basically your safety net. Deborah says there's also an AI software that can run through your database that looks at giving patterns and can help identify those that are likely to leave a legacy gift. Absolutely, yes. The Tarot, I think, is one of them, but more and more, yeah. I've met them. This was several years ago. I met them at a conference. I had a big conversation. I had a few meetings with them. There is still a bit of tweaking to happen, but it's getting better and better. A lot of CRMs are starting to integrate this in their CRM. I know Bloomerang has as well. So it's really interesting to see how that's happening. I'd like to test them just to make sure, because they still sometimes make, and especially US-based softwares, they're making assumptions because they're making decisions based on, let's evaluate wealth, but it's not about wealth. Okay, you want to be looking at someone with assets, but the decision is not based on wealth, and that's the biggest downfall of US-based legacy giving, in my opinion. This is only my opinion. Okay, so I'm being told that there's 10 minutes left. Well, now maybe 9. So this always happens. I need to keep going. I included in here in your slide deck, because now the next step is like, you know what you need to do. You know what you don't need to do, you shouldn't do. You know what the statistical predisposition. So how do you get started? I've included a sample survey. This is a survey that I received as a donor to the Royal Victoria Hospital Foundation, one of the organizations that I donate to monthly. And this is a great example. This is probably one of the best legacy surveys that I've seen across the world. And I usually use this with clients and organizations. And of course, you can adapt this. I just want to bring your attention to 2 things, 2 questions. Question number 5, that says more than 1 million Canadians alive today. Keep in mind, this is over 10 years old, okay? So this number has changed, obviously. More than 1 million Canadians alive today have made a legacy gift in their will. Why is this question important? Well, because it speaks about social proof. So in behavioral science, we know that social proof is a nudge that helps people see that, oh, this is something that's very common. So, we see this in like toothpaste commercials. 3 out of 4 dentists recommend whatever toothpaste, right? That's saying, look, the proof of concept has been proven. You can trust this. So this is incredibly important to use in your legacy marketing, actually in all your marketing, right? I always want to have social proof. And the second most important question in all of this is number 8. So when it comes to the Royal Vic and a legacy gift, which one of the following options represents your current situation? So this is where your supporters have an opportunity to raise their hand and let you know where they sit in that journey, right? And so basically what you want to do is capture this in your CRM. You identify those that are pledgers, considerers, intenders, and pledgers, and inquirers, and then you create that journey based on how they answered, right? So these are the 2 things I wanted to bring to your attention. Sample gift will language here, because we're Chapel in New York. If you're a fund holder, whether in Canada or the US, this is sample language you can use in your marketing materials, or you can create a nice form that you can send to your donors. And so whether it's a residual or pecuniary, you would just basically adapt based on which country you have your fund holder to. I didn't put our chart number because we have different numbers, but either myself or Kevin, we can provide it to you so you can have the country specific one. And there you go. And then, but you want to make sure that it specifically says to be directed and then to your organization, right? So we would facilitate that gift for your organization. I have already facilitated 2 or 3 legacy gifts for fund holders in Canada. And that was a lot of fun because, you know, I'm a nerd. Other gift vehicles to consider is life insurance. I touched on that very briefly earlier. So this is and that could be a whole different webinar, of course, but it's great for mostly younger, healthy donors. So I'm talking about people in their 30s. I'm not saying you should start doing this now, but it's something to consider if ever you have a question. So what's really interesting is that the donor can either buy a life insurance specifically to donate it to the organization, or if they have a paid up life insurance policy, they can transfer the ownership to the charity. So that's really interesting tax benefit to the donor. And then another one is pension plan. So whether in Canada or the US, you can donate your pension plan or what's left over in your pension plan. And the really neat thing is that can be integrated in the will. So it simplifies things. I'm not going to go through all these questions because we're running out of time, but these are all questions that my good friend Jen Love at Agents of Good in Toronto, an amazing agency that does all, annual giving, monthly giving, and legacies. I do a lot of work with her on legacies. These are key questions that are those deep value and belief questions that you can use when you're having conversations with your supporters. So this is I would say print this, keep this near your computer. And some final pro tips. I'm sorry, I'm talking really fast. Update your legacy page on your website so that your supporters outside of your current market know about legacy gifts and understand that you can receive them. Sprinkle legacy dust everywhere. So what do I mean by legacy dust? Sprinkle legacy messaging in all your marketing, everything that you put out to your donors. That's how you start doing that mindset shift with your supporters. Focus on lead acquisition and conversion. The gifts will come in later on, but focus on how many conversations you're having, how many donors are inquiring about leaving a gift in a will, and then take them through this journey along the way. Build that relational trust through conversations, impact reporting, sharing information, telling stories, having virtual town halls, etc. And take your time. It's going to take time, but it's doable. And then basically monitor and adjust accordingly, constantly monitor. If you want to have more legacy resources, and I'm going to be really blunt, a fabulous blog, but of course there's a lot of blogs. It is mine. I'm just teasing. I have a lot of resources on my website, Globetrotting Fundraiser, and I also write a blog. And so you can read the blog whenever you want. I also have in my resources page, I have downloadables that you can get, but also references to other blogs that I find really helpful in general, but also contribute to your knowledge base for legacy fundraising. So I'm going to pass this on to Nancy, who's going to talk about legacy, about Chapel in Europe.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Ligia, for a wonderful thing. If you don't know Chapel in York, we set up and run legal entities like 501c3s, like UK charities, like Section 88s. If you want your own dedicated entity, we also have our own foundations, such as the Canadian Foundation, the US, UK, EU, Switzerland, Hong Kong, etc., through which you can fundraise, including accepting legacy donations. As Ligia said, your own legal entity should be able to do that as well. If you have any further questions about anything you've heard during this webinar, we'd be delighted to answer it. Feel free to contact either Ligia or me. We've got a whole thing on legacy, on planned giving in the US, which is a huge thing. Of course, we've done a webinar on it. It's on our YouTube. Happy to answer any questions about that as well. But anyway, I can only say thank you, Ligia, for an absolutely amazing webinar. It is so terrific. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your time, attention, and I think we're done. We'll go out now and say thank you all. Have a good rest of your days or nights or mornings or wherever you might be. And again, feel free to be in touch. I'm delighted to answer any questions. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.